There are unfortunately no shortage of evil people out there, and with the popularity of true crime, a lot of their stories end up being made into crazy documentaries on Netflix. Whether it's an unsolved crime that maybe needs a renewed public interest, a criminal on the run who needs to be caught and brought to justice, or a terrible true crime story that we can all learn a lesson from, this list has it all. Let's dive right into the top 10 evil people who should have their own Netflix documentary. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Honolulu Killer. This is the moniker given to an unidentified serial killer who was active in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1985 and 1986. Throughout those years, it is said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. The women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were all from different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities of each crime, authorities were able to determine that they were all likely committed by the same person. Despite the years it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere, hiding from taking responsibility. Perhaps if there were to be a documentary released about this case, although it's been a number of years, a renewed public interest might end in more leads for those investigating the case. In our number 9 spot today, we have Victor Gerena. Back in September of 1983, Victor was 25 years old and was a trusted employee of the West Hartford, Connecticut Wells Fargo Express Company, but on September 12th, that all changed. After working throughout the day and completing the scheduled rounds of currency collection from the local banks, Victor held his co-workers hostage before tying them up, handcuffing them, and injecting them with a mysterious substance he claimed would leave them unable to move. After doing this, Victor proceeded to take about $7 million, which was one of the largest cash robberies in US history at the time. His co-workers were later able to get themselves untied and they called the authorities, but by that time, Victor was gone. They found his car, but it had been abandoned, and of course, the money was gone. They later found out that Victor was part of a larger group who had orchestrated this entire thing, and they also found out that part of the money was used to purchase a surface-to-air missile that was later launched at FBI headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Thankfully, it turned out to be a huge waste of money because it did little damage, and fortunately, no one was injured. 2 years later, there were 14 people who were arrested in Puerto Rico, Massachusetts, and Texas as they were found to be involved in the entire operation, but Victor once again escaped capture and has not been seen since. This case is honestly just a crazy story. I could have been convinced that this was the plot of a heist movie and not a real-life scenario. In our number 8 spot today, we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972, and Arthur was sure to commit some of the worst kinds of crimes. After the first 2 of his crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989. Thankfully, he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release, however, was the subject of huge controversy, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, who's the professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called his early release one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. Although Arthur ended up passing away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence, a documentary about him in this story could be quite interesting. It would be really intriguing to see just how this horrible person ended up being released, how that sort of thing happens, what we can do to prevent it. You know, a lot could be learned from this specific case. In our number 7 spot today, we have the West Mesa Bone Collector. This is the name used to describe an unidentified serial killer who is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 11 different women whose remains were found buried in the desert of West Mesa in 2009. Despite this story being international news, it remains unsolved, which might be a reason for it to be made into a new Netflix doc. It is thought that this could be one person, or it could potentially be linked to some sort of group. There have been tips throughout the years, and authorities have worked hard to try and get to the bottom of these crimes, but still, the killer remains at large. There have been a few different suspects throughout the years, but there hasn't been enough concrete evidence to charge anyone with the crimes. What's really interesting about this case is that although the remains were found in 2009, according to authorities, upon examining satellite images, it is believed that the last of the remains were placed there in 2005. In our number 6 spot today, we have Joanna Dennehy. This is the person responsible for a series of killings and attacks that took place in March 2013. Joanna is a very cold and heartless person and has, on many occasions, been said to laugh at her crimes and the lives she took, even still behind bars where she will be forever. After the first of her crimes, authorities launched a manhunt for her, and they used CCTV CCTV footage to help track her down. She was finally caught after attacking 2 dog walkers who, thanks to immediate medical intervention, were able to survive. There are many things about this story that make it exceptionally chilling, and it seems as though most people Joanna encounters are left with quite an impression of what a horrible person she is. On the day she was sentenced, it is reported that the judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, said, quote, "Although you pleaded guilty, you've made it quite clear you have no remorse." He went on to say, quote, "You are a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer." After this, he sentenced her to a whole life order, or life in prison without parole, and it is said that she smiled and laughed at this. Since her time in prison, she is said to have planned escape attempts that involved the killing of a prison guard and other terrifying ideas. This story is just so full of evil and terrible that, although awful to tell, would be crazy to watch. In our number 5 spot today, we have Monica Witt. Monica is a former United States Air Force technical sergeant as well as a defense contractor who has been on the run since 2018. Despite her high-ranking position and high security clearance, she is on the run because she defected to Iran in 2013. It is said that from 2013 up until she was found out, she was using her position in order to spy on the United States and relay that information back to the group she was working for. She used different fake Facebook accounts, and it is said that the information she gave included the classified true name and counterintelligence activities of a US intelligence operative. This is of course a problem regardless of how important this operative was, but it is said that this information she shared had the potential to cause serious damage to the United States national security. It truly is an absolutely wild story, and Monica is still out there on the run, hiding from the consequences of her betrayal and espionage. Not only could a documentary shed some light in on this case and possibly lead to someone who knows her coming forward, but the story really is just insane, and there's tons of turns, and how high security everything is really just ups the stakes. In our number 4 spot today, we have Lee Kimball. This is a man who took the lives of at least 4 people between the years of 2003 and 2004, but I say the words at least because although it's never been able to be proven, it is thought that he actually took the lives of somewhere around 20 plus people. During the first 2 of his crime-filled years, Scott actually worked as an FBI informant, but to none of our surprise now, he was one of the worst informants of all time. Not only did he rarely provide any sort of evidence that ended up actually being useful, but much of the evidence he provided ended up later being proven false. Watching a documentary about how that happened would be super interesting. As he's in the midst of committing crimes, he's also having meetings and phone calls with the FBI. That's some Walter White level stuff. He was caught in 2006 not only for these horrific crimes, but many others as well, which included things like fraud and forgery. He ended up being sentenced to 70 years in prison, and he still is currently serving that sentence. In our number 3 spot today, we have Israel Keyes. Israel is quite a prolific serial killer and truly a terrifying person. While everyone on this list is horrible, Israel is particularly scary because of the fact that he had no MO or type. He just killed at random. Like, he was so prepared for these random crimes that he left kill kits all over the US so that he would be prepared for whenever, whoever he chose crossed his path. It isn't quite clear how many of these crimes he committed, and many missing persons reports that are still open could potentially be linked to him. It is said that Israel had a sort of admiration and obsession with other prolific serial killers like Ted Bundy or Robert Hansen. He even said, quote, "I probably know every single serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine." I don't know, taking true crime a little too seriously. In March of 2012, Israel was finally apprehended and was to stand trial for his crimes, but unfortunately while awaiting trial he went on to take his own life. He left behind a note and a drawing of 11 skulls, which led authorities to believe that this may be the number of victims he had. This is just one of the most terrifying true crime stories and would definitely make for quite a horrifying documentary. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Vending Machine Killer. In 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. When this string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they all had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they had all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this whole thing, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase that was made from a vending machine. When people didn't want their free drink, they would leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful and kind, and of course that means that some horrible person out there had to ruin it for everyone. So as it turns out, someone was taking these drinks, lacing them with poison, and then leaving them on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around and drink it and then be sick or pass away. It is almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this because you have to narrow down down where the person picked up the drink, and in 1985 there weren't as many CCTV cameras as there are now. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. A documentary about this would definitely be interesting to watch, but because it is still unsolved, having the story on a huge platform like Netflix might just help get it out there and perhaps bring in more leads. In our number 1 spot today, we have Bhadreshkumar Patel. This is a man who in 2015 was in the United States in Hanover, Maryland with his wife, Palak. It is said that the pair were traveling to visit relatives and that they had both taken a job at a local Dunkin' Donuts that was owned by one of their family members. It was at this location that, on April 12, 2015, it is said that he took the life of his wife. Surveillance footage shows the two of them walking together into the kitchen around 9:30 p.m. that day before they disappear out of view behind some racks that were in the kitchen. Shortly after this, he appears alone, turns the oven off, and leaves. Authorities believe that this may all have been over an argument where one part of the couple wanted to return to India while the other one wanted to stay in the United States. After customers of the store began getting worried when no one came to take their order, they thankfully decided to approach a nearby police officer. The officer went to investigate, and that is when he sadly found her body. Here's the deal though, since this crime he has totally gone missing. The authorities have not been able to find him since the last sighting of him, which was on April 13th, 2015 at around 10 a.m. at Newark Penn Station in New Jersey. He had taken a hotel shuttle there and has never been seen since. There is currently a $100,000 reward for information that leads to his whereabouts. The story is unimaginable, but maybe with more people knowing about it, he can be caught and finally brought to the justice that he deserves. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye!